It was just past midnight, that quiet liminal hour when the world seems to hold its breath. I found myself in the basement, surrounded by the scent of warm cotton and lavender-scented detergent folding laundry. It was a ritual, my little act of control in a life that felt increasingly adrift. My husband David had retreated to our bedroom hours ago, his steady, peaceful breathing, a familiar rhythm in the house. I had this habit of folding everyone's clothes, separately stacking them in neat piles and leaving them outside their respective doors. David's shirts, my blouses, and a stack of clean t-shirts for my stepson Ethan. It was in these small, orderly acts that I found a semblance of peace. But that night the peace was about to be shattered. I was more tired than usual, my eyelids heavy as I pushed open a door I thought led to the guest room. But the room wasn't the guest room, it was Ethan's, and what I saw in that dimly lit space would unravel the carefully folded fabric of my life. This is a story about a secret. A secret born from a moment of accidental discovery, a secret that would become both a sanctuary and a prison. It's a story about the dangerous lines between comfort and desire, and what happens when those lines are not just crossed, but completely erased. Before we step into that room with me, I need to ask you something. Have you ever discovered a secret so profound, it changed not only how you saw someone else, but how you saw yourself? Let me know in the comments below. And please, if you find yourself captivated by this journey into the human heart, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell. You won't want to miss a single chapter of this story. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand the silence that came before it. My marriage to David, Ethan's father, wasn't a bad marriage. That's the most difficult part to explain. There was no shouting, no cruelty. There was just quiet. A comfortable, familiar, and soul-crushingly stagnant quiet. David was a good man, a stable provider, a kind father. But somewhere along the way, he had stopped seeing me. I was no longer Sarah, the woman he'd fallen in love with, the woman with her own thoughts and desires. I had become a part of the household architecture, the wife, the stepmom, a predictable fixture in his orderly life. Our conversations were about bills and schedules. Our intimacy was a gentle, passionless peck on the cheek before he rolled over to sleep. I was starving not for food, but for a look, a touch, a single moment that made me feel like a woman again, and not just a component in a well-oiled machine. Ethan had come into my life when he was 12, a quiet, grieving boy whose mother had left David for another man. I had tried my best to be a gentle presence, a source of stability, not a replacement. Over the years, we developed a warm, if somewhat distant relationship. He was a good kid, navigating the awkward, lanky transition from boy to man. Now at 19, he was home for the summer after his first year of college, a strange mix of youthful awkwardness and emerging adult confidence. The house was different with him, in it filled with the sounds of his video games and the quiet energy of his presence. It was a disruption to the sterile quiet, and a part of me, a part one refused to acknowledge, was grateful for it. That night, pushing open his door, the stack of clean t-shirts warm in my hands, I stepped into a scene of private, painful vulnerability. There he was, lying on his bed, completely naked, his focus so absolute that he didn't hear me come in. His handsome face, usually so quick to a lazy grin, was a mask of frustration and quiet embarrassment. And his hands were moving slowly, almost hesitantly, across his own body. Why does it still curve like this?" He muttered under his breath, the words a pained whisper. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The t-shirt suddenly felt immensely heavy. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to shut the door, to pretend I had seen nothing, to retreat to the safety of my laundry and my quiet, passionless life. But something held me there, rooted to the spot, a toxic cocktail of shame for intruding, a startling bolt of curiosity, and a deep unexpected ache that resonated with my own secret loneliness. I slipped back just enough to be hidden by the shadow of the doorway, my heart pounding a frantic, guilty rhythm. His body was beautiful, the lean, strong form of a young man on the cusp of his full power. But it was his uncertainty, his raw vulnerability, that held me captive. The curve he hated was pronounced, unlike anything I'd ever noticed on David, or any other man for that matter. It was thick and strong, but it bent at an odd, noticeable angle that clearly caused him immense distress. Suddenly he let out a low groan of frustration and threw his head back against the pillow. "This is why girls laugh," he whispered to the ceiling, his voice thick with a self-loathing that was painful to hear. And then he saw me. His eyes, which had been closed in misery, snapped open and met mine. The horror that flooded his face was absolute. He scrambled for a pillow, his movements clumsy, and panicked, his entire face, neck and chest burning a deep, mortified red. "Mom?" he stammered, his voice cracking. He never called me Mom, it was always Sarah. The slip was a testament to his sheer panic. I'm so sorry, I didn't know you were. I thought this was the guest room." I stammered back, holding the stack of t-shirts like a shield. We stood there breathless, the silence in the room heavy and suffocating, thick with his shame and my own. And then in that impossibly long second, something inside me shifted. The part of me that was a wife, a stepmother, the part that respected boundaries and propriety, it just went quiet. And another part, a part one didn't even know existed, took over. I stepped fully into the room and gently closed the door behind me, the soft click sealing us inside that moment. "You don't need to be embarrassed," I said softly, my voice surprisingly steady. I walked over and placed the t-shirts on his dresser. "I'm a woman, Ethan. A grown woman. There's nothing about the human body that can shock me." He looked utterly confused, his eyes wide, and searching mine for meaning, for a trap, for an escape. He was still clutching the pillow to his waist like a life raft. I did something then that I can't explain even to myself. I walked over and sat down on the edge of the bed beside him, my heart pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. The mattress dipped with my weight and he flinched. "You said the curve bothers you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He just nodded, unable to speak, his eyes glistening with unshed tears of humiliation. "Girls? They think it's weird. They laugh." I hesitated for a beat, my own insecurities, my own feelings of being judged and found wanting swirling within me. Then I reached out my hand and gently rested it on his thigh just above his knee. The contact was electric, his breath hitched, his eyes widening even further. "Maybe," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "maybe I can help you understand it." He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape. Slowly, hesitantly, he lowered the pillow. My eyes flickered down and I forced myself to look at him, at the source of his shame, with a clinical, detached gaze. But my fingers trembled as I moved my hand from his knee and touched him. Just a light, reassuring touch. I was trying to be maternal, comforting, but the context, the situation made it anything but. There was the heat of his skin, the vulnerability of his nakedness, and a strange, powerful pull I couldn't explain. "It's not ugly," I whispered, looking back up into his eyes, forcing him to meet my gaze. "It's not weird, it's beautiful, it's unique, it's you." He looked at me as if I was the first person in his entire life who had ever said something kind about his body, as if I had just handed him a gift he never thought he'd receive. And in that moment, the air in the room changed, the energy shifted from shame and comfort to something deeper, something far more dangerous. It was no longer about helping him, it was about the way he was looking at me with a desperate, dawning gratitude that felt more intimate than any kiss. We didn't go any further that night. I squeezed his leg gently, stood up and left the room without another word. But everything had already shifted. A line had been crossed, a door had been opened, and we both knew in that silent, charged space that there was no going back. This is where the story truly begins. A single moment of shared vulnerability has changed everything. What happens when comfort turns into something more? If you're feeling the tension build, if you understand the impossible situation these two souls have found themselves in, please hit that like button. Your support lets us know you're on this journey with us. I told myself I wouldn't go back to that room. I told myself it was a momentary lapse in judgment, a kind act that had been misinterpreted by the charged atmosphere. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. Ethan. His nervous, hopeful glance. The way he looked at me with that heart-wrenching mixture of confusion and dawning adoration. The nights were the hardest. I'd lie in bed next to David, his body a familiar but distant presence, and I'd feel a profound and aching loneliness. He would sleep peacefully, utterly unaware that my heart and my thoughts were no longer in our bed, but somewhere down the hall, in a room with a 19-year-old boy who had shown me his deepest insecurity. A few days passed in a state of excruciating unspoken tension. We were polite at breakfast. We avoided eye contact. We moved around each other like two planets that had been knocked from their orbits, afraid of a collision. I think we were both hoping it would just fade away, that the memory would soften, and we could go back to being Sarah and Ethan's stepmom and stepson. But it didn't fade. It grew stronger, a humming electric current that ran beneath the surface of every mundane interaction. It was Ethan who finally broke the silence. One morning after David had left for work, he found me in the kitchen. His voice was quiet but steady, a stark contrast to the nervous energy radiating from him. About the other night, he started, his eyes fixed on the coffee mug in his hands. "You don't have to explain," I whispered, my own mind, racing my heart, starting its now familiar frantic rhythm. He let out a long sigh, the weight of his self-consciousness clear in the sound. I've always felt like I was different. A freak, like my body was some kind of joke. His voice cracked on the last word. My heart ached for him. Here was this young man, strong and capable on the surface, but so incredibly fragile underneath. "Ethan," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "Listen to me. There is nothing wrong with you." He finally looked up at me, a desperate hope flickering in his eyes. You said you could help me." I froze. The memory of my hand on his skin, the heat, the intimacy, it all came rushing back. This was my chance to shut it down, to put the boundary back in place. Maybe we should just forget it," I said, my voice weak. "It's not right, Ethan." He just nodded, a mask of disappointment falling over his features, and left the room. The sight of his slumped shoulder sent a pain of guilt and a strange protective anger through me. That night, David went out for his weekly poker game with friends. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The silence seemed to amplify my thoughts, my desires, my confusion. I found myself pacing the living room, a war raging inside me. And then, as if my feet had a will of their own, I was standing outside Ethan's door again, my heart pounding against my ribs. I raised my hand to knock, but before my knuckles could touch the wood, a soft voice came from inside. "Come in." He was sitting on the edge of his bed, fully dressed this time, in a t-shirt and jeans, but the vulnerability in his eyes was the same. "I shouldn't be here," I whispered, closing the door behind me. "But you are," he replied, his gaze intense. We didn't speak for a long moment, just looked at each other. Two people caught in a moment that felt far too big for words. "I can't stop thinking about that night," he admitted finally, his voice raw. "Me neither," I confessed, the words a weight off my chest. He stood up and stepped closer, closing the distance between us. Can I just hold you?" he asked, his voice breaking on the last word. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak, completely overwhelmed by the raw, unguarded honesty of the moment. He wrapped his arms around me gently at first, then pulling me tighter. It wasn't a sexual embrace, it was a hug of profound comfort, of shared loneliness. In his arms I felt a sense of safety and belonging that I hadn't even realized I was missing so desperately. It was so wrong, but it felt so right, like coming home to a place I'd never been before. He pulled back slightly, his hands still on my arms, his eyes searching mine. "You make me feel whole," he whispered. "You always were," I whispered back, and then our lips met. The kiss was as soft and slow as the conversation that had led to it, full of all the confusion and raw emotion and pent-up longing that had been simmering between us. When we finally parted, breathless and trembling, we both knew the line had been irrevocably crossed. We didn't go further that night. We just sat on his bed, held hands, and whispered secrets in the dark about his fears, about my loneliness. We shared a fragile, forbidden closeness that neither of us had ever expected to find. But the desire, the physical need, it simmered just beneath the surface, a dangerous and undeniable fire. The morning after, I tried to pretend nothing had changed. I moved through the motions of my life on autopilot. I brewed coffee. I cleaned the kitchen. I kept busy. But every quiet moment was filled with the memory of Ethan's touch, his voice, the way he looked at me. David kissed me goodbye as he left for work, a routine, passionless gesture, and he was completely unaware of the raging storm inside me. That evening, he called to say he had to work a late shift, leaving the house empty and vast. I sat on the couch in the dark, telling myself not to move, not to go to him. But my body betrayed me. My legs carried me down the hall to his door, as if pulled by an invisible string. He was lying on his bed, headphones on, eyes closed, lost in his music. When he opened his eyes and saw me standing in his doorway, his expression shifted, a tangled knot of hope and fear. "I shouldn't be here." I whispered again, the words, our familiar useless mantra. "But you are," he replied, sitting up and taking off his headphones. We didn't rush. There was no frantic urgency. Each touch was slow, deliberate, heavy, with all the aching emotion we had been suppressing. He whispered that he'd never felt this way before, that he'd never felt so accepted, so seen. I closed my eyes and whispered back, "Take your time, make it count." In his arms, in his bed, I felt reborn. I wasn't a wife or a stepmother. I was just a woman, alive and desired. And for those stolen hours, nothing else in the world mattered. But secrets, especially secrets this big, don't stay hidden forever. They have a way of seeping out, of poisoning the air. One rainy Thursday, David came home from work early, drenched and tired, and he caught me. I was just stepping out of Ethan's room, my robe slipping loosely from my shoulder. Time froze. The look on his face was a mixture of confusion and a dawning terrible suspicion. "I was just checking on him," I stammered, my heart seizing in my chest. "He said he wasn't feeling well." David's eyes, those familiar kind eyes, searched mine for a long moment. I held his gaze, my mind screaming. He said nothing more, just nodded tiredly and walked into our bedroom. A wave of relief so intense it made me dizzy washed over me. Or maybe it was just denial. That night, I lay awake, heart pounding, staring into the darkness. What if he knew? What if that was just the beginning of him putting the pieces together? After that, a new kind of tension entered the house. A cold, heavy fear. Ethan was distant, texting me late at night that maybe we should stop, that the risk was too great. But my heart wasn't ready to let go. We started taking more risks, stolen kisses in the dark hallway. Moments of frantic, silent passion when David was in the shower. But the weight of the guilt, the constant humming fear of discovery was always there. The night we forgot to lock the door, and David almost walked in on us. I saw the look of sheer terror in Ethan's eyes, and I knew this was unsustainable. Our secret was no longer a sanctuary, it was a cage. That final morning, the house felt colder than ever. David's eyes were full of questions he didn't voice. Ethan was quiet with dark, haunted shadows under his eyes. I looked from the face of my kind, unsuspecting husband, to the face of the young man who had become my entire world, and I knew one thing with a soul-crushing certainty. Nothing would ever be the same again. Some desires, I realized, come at a price far too high to pay. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to this incredibly difficult and personal story. Your attention and your willingness to hear these truths mean the world to us. We have many more fascinating and compelling stories to share, and we would love for you to join us on this journey. If you are moved or intrigued by what you heard, please consider subscribing to the channel and clicking that notification bell so you don't miss out on any of our future videos. Your support is what helps us continue to create more content that you'll love. Thank you for being here.